Have you ever felt the injustice of powerful individuals making decisions that affect our lives without even asking? Have you ever witnessed something precious, whether it's nature, a community, or cherished memories, being erased simply to serve the interests of a select few? If Rachel Carter's story resonated with you, if you believe that justice and fairness must be defended, then don't forget to like this video, share it, and help others realize that they too have a voice. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another inspiring story. Every like, every share is more than just a click. It's a way to spread a powerful message of courage and perseverance. It helps build a community of people who believe in integrity and are ready to stand up when it matters most. Let's create change together, starting by refusing to let silence bury the truth. Hit that subscribe button today because justice isn't a distant ideal. It begins with the small actions we take every single day. Rachel Carter has always loved nature. She grew up in this neighborhood where tree-lined streets, lush green lawns, and most importantly, a small creek running through her property created a serene and picturesque environment. The crystal-clear water flowed gently throughout the seasons, like a familiar melody she never grew tired of hearing. That creek wasn't just part of the landscape, it was a part of her memories. It was where she spent hours reading books, where her parents taught her to listen to the sound of flowing water to find peace. But now, that peace was under threat. Ever since Philip Dawson took over as president of the HOA, the neighborhood was no longer as tranquil as it once was. He was an ambitious man, determined to turn the community into a model residential area, one with perfectly manicured lawns, polished stone pathways, and suffocatingly strict regulations. Anything that didn't fit his vision was deemed a liability, something that could lower property values. Philip wasn't the type to propose changes for discussion. He imposed them, forcing everyone to comply. And if anyone opposed him, they quickly realized they had no voice in this community. Rachel had heard whispers from neighbors about upcoming changes, but she never thought it would affect her, until a letter from the HOA arrived at her doorstep. In it, Philip Dawson declared that the creek running through her land was a disadvantage, a potential hazard that could reduce property values in the area. He demanded that she agree to let the HOA fill it in, transforming what was once a natural waterway into a flat, uniform lawn that met his aesthetic standards. Rachel couldn't believe what she was reading. That creek had been there for hundreds of years, an essential part of the local ecosystem, providing water for birds, small animals, and cooling the air on hot summer days. Filling it in wasn't just environmental destruction, it was the erasure of something natural, something meaningful, something irreplaceable. More importantly, this was her land, yet the HOA acted as if they had the right to decide its fate. Rachel's neighbors started to feel uneasy as well. Many of them had already been victims of the HOA's overreach, forced to repaint their houses according to a specific color palette, remove flower pots deemed inappropriate, or even fined for leaving their cars parked in their own driveways for too long. But no one had ever directly confronted Philip Dawson before. He had power, he had loyal HOA members backing him, and more than anything, he had the ability to make life miserable for anyone who dared to defy him. Rachel knew she couldn't stand by and watch everything be destroyed, but how could she stop someone like Philip? She needed a plan, a way to force him to listen, to show the entire neighborhood that the HOA couldn't control everything. She wasn't the type to seek confrontation, but this was her home, and she wasn't going to let anyone take away her right to decide what happened to it. The fiery glow of the sunset reflected on the slow-moving water of the creek. Rachel tightened her grip on the letter. If Philip Dawson thought she would surrender easily, he was gravely mistaken. Rachel Carter spent the entire night thinking about the letter from the HOA. She couldn't understand how a small, natural creek, something that had existed here long before the neighborhood itself, could suddenly be considered a problem. But as she dug deeper, what she discovered infuriated her even more. This wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment decision. Philip Dawson had planned this for a long time. He wanted to transform the neighborhood into a model community where everything was strictly controlled according to his standards. To him, the creek was nothing but an inconvenience, something wild, untamed, and beyond his control. Rachel immediately sent a letter of protest, demanding that the HOA reconsider their decision. She believed that if she made a reasonable case, they would listen. But the response she received was nothing more than a dry, impersonal letter from the HOA office, stating that the decision had already been approved and that the creek would be filled in within a week. No discussion, no chance for an appeal, just a unilateral order. She turned to her neighbors, hoping they would stand with her. Some sympathized, saying they didn't want the creek destroyed either, but they were afraid. "There's nothing we can do, Rachel," said Mrs. Henderson, an elderly resident. "Philip controls the entire HOA. If we go against him, he can make our lives very difficult." Others outright avoided her, not wanting to get involved. They had grown used to the way the HOA operated, a small governing body within the neighborhood that wielded nearly absolute power. Anyone who dared to challenge them always ended up regretting it. Rachel couldn't believe that everyone was willing to live in fear like this. But even if she had to stand alone, she couldn't allow the creek to be destroyed. The next day, she marched straight to the HOA office to confront Philip Dawson. She demanded a conversation, a chance to defend the creek. But he simply looked at her with cold indifference, a smirk curling at the corner of his lips. "Rachel, you need to understand that we're doing what's best for the community," he said, his tone that of a man accustomed to issuing decrees. "A wild creek like that can cause flooding, lowering property values. It doesn't fit our vision." "Your vision?" Rachel nearly lost her patience. "This is my land. That creek runs through my legally owned property. The HOA has no right to tell me what I can or cannot do with it." Philip merely shrugged, as if the conversation meant nothing. "The HOA has the authority to ensure uniformity in the neighborhood, and you know that. We've made our decision, and that's final." The next morning, Rachel woke up to the sound of rumbling machinery. She rushed outside, and her heart sank. Construction workers had arrived. A bulldozer stood ready. A group of HOA members in uniform stood nearby, observing the preparations as if it were just another routine task. Rachel ran forward, placing herself in front of the bulldozer. "Stop! This is my land!" One of the workers hesitated, glancing toward Philip Dawson for instructions. Philip, his expression as cold as ever, simply crossed his arms. "Proceed. She has no authority to stop us." And then, to Rachel's horror, the bulldozer began digging into the creek bed. Stones were overturned, the clear water was blocked, and the surrounding trees were ripped apart. Everything she loved, everything tied to her childhood, was being destroyed before her eyes. A fire of rage ignited in Rachel's chest. Did they really think she would back down? That she would just stand there and watch while everything was erased? They had made a mistake. Philip Dawson might think he controlled everything in this neighborhood, but Rachel Carter had made up her mind. She would not let him win, and she would fight back with everything she had. Rachel Carter couldn't sleep that night. The sound of bulldozers still echoed in her mind, the image of the crystal clear water being cut off, rocks being crushed, and trees being uprooted haunted her. She had tried to fight with words, but Philip Dawson and the HOA didn't care. They had destroyed the creek as if it meant nothing, as if it was just a minor obstacle on their path to what they called property value. But this wasn't the end. It couldn't be the end. Rachel knew she couldn't let this go. She sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and started researching. If the HOA could so blatantly destroy something like this, did they even have the legal authority to do so? She had heard before that there were limits to the HOA's power, that they couldn't control everything outside their jurisdiction. If the creek was on her land, how could they order it to be filled in without her consent? Rachel dove into legal documents, combing through HOA bylaws and regulations for hours, scanning each clause, searching for a loophole. And then she found something important. The HOA did not have full authority over all land in the neighborhood. Certain areas were considered private property, and in some cases, the HOA could not interfere without the owner's permission. Her heart pounded. If she could prove that the creek was within a section of land beyond the HOA's control, she could turn the tables. But that was just the first step. She needed more. Rachel expanded her research, this time looking into environmental protection laws. If the creek held ecological value, if it played a crucial role in the local environment, then the HOA's actions could be a violation of the law. She scoured environmental agency websites, studied laws regarding natural water sources, and took detailed notes. She also reached out for help. A friend who worked in urban planning suggested she contact an environmental expert. Rachel didn't hesitate. By the next day, she had called a local specialist who had studied natural waterways in the area. When she described what had happened, his interest was immediate. If they filled in the creek without conducting an environmental impact assessment, that could be a serious violation, he told her. Rachel didn't forget about her neighbors either. She began knocking on doors, sharing what she had learned. Some still hesitated, afraid of the HOA's retaliation, but others started to listen. Mrs. Henderson, who had once believed nothing could be done, now looked uneasy. "If they can do this to your land, they can do it to anyone," she murmured. Rachel knew she couldn't do this alone. She needed to gather evidence, gain more support, and most importantly, form a plan. As she reviewed everything she had uncovered, a spark of hope ignited within her. Philip Dawson thought he could impose his will on the entire community, but he had underestimated her. Rachel wasn't just an angry resident. She was someone who understood that justice doesn't come easily, and she was ready to fight for what was rightfully hers. Rachel Carter knew that uncovering the truth wasn't enough. She needed a concrete action to force the HOA to pay attention. If Philip Dawson could casually order the destruction of a natural feature for his own personal gain, then she could find a way to make him face the consequences. But how could a single resident stand against the powerful HOA machine? She spent days thinking, searching for the HOA's weak point. Philip controlled the meetings, manipulated the voting process, and kept residents in fear. If she wanted to do something, it had to be big enough to get the entire community's attention, even that of local authorities. Then, during a conversation with a neighbor, she came across a critical piece of information. The HOA heavily depended on an emergency access road running through the neighborhood. This road wasn't the main entrance, but it was essential for the HOA and certain privileged residents. High-ranking HOA members, including Philip Dawson, used it as a private access point to enter and leave the community without passing through the main gate, which was monitored by security. It was also the route used for transporting supplies and organizing internal HOA events. If that road were blocked, the HOA would descend into chaos. Rachel reviewed the property maps she had studied during her research. Then she found something that made her smile. A section of the emergency access road ran through her property. The HOA had no authority over it unless she permitted them access. This was the weakness she needed to exploit. The next morning, Rachel hired 5 large trucks and parked them directly across the emergency access road, completely cutting off the route. She wasn't breaking any laws. This was her legally owned land, and she had full rights to use it however she pleased. She also wasn't blocking the neighborhood's main entrance, meaning no one could accuse her of disrupting the community. But for the HOA, this was a disaster. By the next morning, residents woke up to complete turmoil. The community's wealthier members could no longer use their secret shortcut. HOA board members scrambled, making frantic phone calls, trying to find a way to get the road reopened. But Rachel didn't move an inch. Philip Dawson arrived almost immediately, his face red with anger. He stormed toward Rachel, his frustration clear in his eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he growled. Rachel crossed her arms, her expression calm. "I'm just using my land within my legal rights, just like you did when you destroyed my creek." Philip narrowed his eyes, immediately realizing that this was retaliation. He tried to keep his composure, but the concern was evident on his face. "You can't do this. You're disrupting HOA operations." Rachel smirked. "Oh? So, when you destroyed my creek without asking me, it was for the good of the community. But when I use my land within my legal rights, that's considered a disruption?" The crowd of residents began to gather. They looked at Philip, then at Rachel, and for the first time, some of them dared to speak up. "She has the right to do this. The HOA can't control everything. We need an emergency meeting, now." Philip realized he couldn't ignore this any longer. Reluctantly, he agreed to hold an emergency HOA meeting, hoping he could somehow turn things around. But Rachel was ready. She had all the evidence she needed, from property rights documents to the environmental regulations the HOA had violated. Philip thought he could manipulate everyone. But this time, Rachel would make him face the truth, and she wasn't backing down. The emergency HOA meeting was held that very afternoon, and the meeting room was packed with residents, many of whom had never attended a meeting before. But today was different. Today, everyone wanted to know what was happening, and more importantly, they wanted to see Philip Dawson answer for what had taken place over the past few days. Rachel Carter entered the room, holding a stack of documents. She was no longer alone. Some residents, who had once been too afraid to speak up, now stood with her. They didn't just support her, they had started questioning how the HOA had been operating all this time. Philip Dawson sat at the center of the room, his face tight with irritation. He was not accustomed to being challenged, and he certainly wasn't used to a regular resident like Rachel openly defying him. "We will begin the meeting," Philip announced, trying to maintain an air of authority. "We are gathered here today because a resident has illegally blocked the emergency access road, disrupting HOA operations and inconveniencing many members of this community." Rachel didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Philip. "Yes, I blocked the emergency road," she said firmly, "but I did it to prove a point. The HOA cannot keep making unilateral decisions without being held accountable. So, Philip Dawson, I want to ask you, why did you believe you had the right to destroy the creek on my land without my consent?" The room fell silent. This was the question everyone wanted an answer to. Philip took a slow breath, trying to remain composed. "We did it for the good of the community. A creek like that, if not properly managed, can cause flooding. We were simply ensuring the safety of all residents." Rachel tightened her grip on her documents. "Then perhaps you can explain why no environmental impact report was conducted before the HOA decided to fill in the creek. If safety was truly the priority, why did you skip such a crucial step?" Philip hesitated. Rachel pressed on, her voice sharper this time. "The truth is, the creek was never a hazard. It existed long before this neighborhood was even built, and according to HOA bylaws, which I've thoroughly reviewed, nowhere does it state that the HOA has the authority to destroy natural features on privately owned land without the owner's consent. You overstepped your authority, Philip." Murmurs spread throughout the room. Some residents exchanged glances, whispering amongst themselves. They had become used to the HOA making decisions without asking for input, but this was the first time someone had stood up and proven that Philip had abused his power. Philip attempted to regain control. "Rachel, you don't understand how the HOA functions. It is our responsibility to protect the property values of this neighborhood. A wild creek can decrease home values. We were simply doing what's best for everyone." Rachel smirked. "Oh, really? Then perhaps you can explain why, after the creek was filled in, that same plot of land was marked for development? If the HOA was only concerned with safety, why was there immediately a plan for construction on that site?" The room went dead silent. The residents who had been neutral up until now started to doubt everything. A man stood up. "Wait, are you saying you destroyed the creek just to make room for a new development, and you never informed us about it?" Philip didn't respond immediately, but the uneasy look on his face said it all. Rachel scanned the room before speaking decisively. "This isn't just about my creek. This is about how the HOA has been running this neighborhood. We have the right to speak up. We have the right to demand transparency, and we have the right to not be manipulated by a small group of people who only care about their own interests." Applause erupted. Residents who had once been silent now stood up. They were no longer afraid. Philip Dawson could no longer control the situation. His grip on power was slipping, and Rachel knew this was just the beginning. The HOA meeting ended in chaos. Residents who had once been silent, submitting to Philip Dawson's control, finally began to speak up. They questioned him about his authoritarian decisions, the steadily increasing HOA fees that had no clear justification, and the unfair fines imposed for violating regulations they had never even been consulted on. But most importantly, they demanded to know why Rachel Carter's creek had been destroyed without any notice or approval from its rightful owner. Philip Dawson, the man who had once controlled everything in this community, no longer looked so confident. He struggled to maintain control, trying to justify his actions with the same tired excuses about property values and community safety. But his words no longer held weight. Rachel had exposed too much, and now everyone saw him for who he truly was. A resident raised his hand. "I propose a vote of no confidence." The entire room fell silent. This was no small proposal. If a vote of no confidence was held, Philip Dawson could be removed from his position as HOA president. And if he lost that power, he would no longer be able to manipulate the community to serve his own interests. Philip let out a scoffing laugh, trying to regain control. "You can't do that. I've run this HOA for years, and I know the bylaws better than anyone. A vote of no confidence requires the approval of at least 60% of the community to proceed." Rachel didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. She pulled out a petition, one she had spent days gathering, filled with signatures from over 70% of the neighborhood. "I think we have more than enough," she said, her voice calm but filled with strength. The room erupted into murmurs. Some of the HOA members, those who had once supported Philip, now looked at one another nervously. They knew the tide had turned. No one wanted to stand behind a man who was about to fall. Philip clenched his fists. He knew he had lost. The vote was held on the spot, and the outcome was no surprise. Philip Dawson was removed from his position as HOA president by an overwhelming majority. Residents who had once been afraid now found their voices, reclaiming their right to govern their own community. And more than that, they demanded a full investigation into the way the HOA had been operating for years. But the battle wasn't over yet. A week after the meeting, Rachel received a call from the local government office. One of the environmental specialists she had contacted earlier had reported the destruction of her creek to the authorities. After a formal investigation, it was discovered that the HOA's actions were not just a bad decision, they were a serious violation of environmental protection laws. Shortly after, the authorities issued an official notice to the HOA. They ruled that the HOA had exceeded its legal authority and ordered the full restoration of the creek to its original state. Additionally, a hefty fine was imposed on the HOA, and several board members were held personally accountable for the damage they had caused. With Philip Dawson removed and the HOA forced to reform, the neighborhood entered a new chapter. A new board of fair-minded residents was elected to replace the corrupt leadership, and this time, every decision would be made transparently, with the input of the entire community. Rachel stood by the creek, watching as environmental workers restored the flow of water that had once been blocked. She knew it would take time for the creek to return to its former beauty, but she also knew that she had done the right thing. She had fought for what was rightfully hers, and she had won. A gentle breeze passed through the air, carrying the soft sound of running water once again. Rachel smiled. This wasn't just her victory. This was a victory for justice, for everyone who had the courage to stand up and defend what they believed in. The story of Rachel Carter is not just a battle against the abuse of power by the HOA. It is a profound lesson in perseverance, courage, and the importance of protecting what truly matters to us. It reminds us that even when we lack power or status, we still have a voice, and if we know how to use it, we can create change. Lesson number 1. No one can take away your rights unless you allow it. Throughout life, we've all encountered people like Philip Dawson, those who use power to control others, manipulate rules, and serve their own interests. But like Rachel, we must remember that our rights are not something that can be taken away easily, unless we choose to surrender them. What belongs to you, whether it's your home, your land, your memories, or your principles, must be defended. No one can take them from you if you stand up for yourself. Lesson number 2. Silence is the tool of the oppressor. The reason the HOA was able to manipulate the community for so long was simple. People remained silent. They feared retaliation, feared disrupting their lives, so they accepted unfair rules. But silence does not protect us. It only makes the oppressors stronger. It was only when Rachel broke the silence that others found the courage to speak out. For those who have lived through decades of societal changes, this lesson is even more vital. We cannot just watch as injustices happen. We must speak out, take action, and demand fairness. Lesson number 3. Justice must be fought for, not just believed in. We often like to believe that justice will come on its own, that wrongdoers will eventually face consequences. But Rachel did not wait for luck or for someone else to intervene. She acted. She researched, studied the law, gathered evidence, and used facts to turn the tables. Justice is not automatic. It must be pursued, demanded, and fought for. This applies not only to legal battles, but to all aspects of life, whether it's protecting your family, your community, or the values you hold dear. Lesson number 4. Strength comes from unity. Rachel could not have won this fight alone. She succeeded because she found others who shared her beliefs, who understood that the HOA's unchecked power was a threat to everyone. In life, when we face injustice or hardship, seeking support from those around us can make all the difference. No one can do everything alone, and no one should ever feel alone in their fight. Lesson number 5. Nature and memories are worth protecting. The creek in Rachel's story was not just a stream of water, it was a piece of history, a source of memories, a connection to nature. In a world that is rapidly urbanizing and commercializing, we must remind ourselves of the value of simple yet meaningful things. A tree, a garden, a family legacy. Like Rachel, we must cherish and protect the things that hold deep meaning, because once they are lost, they cannot be replaced. Rachel Carter's story is proof that one person can make a difference, that justice is not an unreachable ideal, and that when we fight for what is right, we do not just protect ourselves, we inspire others to stand up too. For those who have witnessed many changes in life, this message is even more important, because experience teaches us that some things cannot be bought with money, but they can be lost if we fail to stand up and protect them. Rachel Carter's story is proof that an ordinary person can create change if they have the perseverance and courage to stand up for what is right. But this is not just her story, it is ours. How many times have you witnessed injustice but felt powerless? How many times have you wanted to speak up but feared that you were alone? Remember this, you are not alone. If this video inspired you, hit the like button to support the values of fairness and integrity. Share this video so that more people realize they have the right to fight for what belongs to them. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel to never miss real stories of courage, resilience, and justice. Every like, share, and subscription amplifies this message and helps build a stronger community, one where every voice matters. Take action today because change only happens when we stand together.